Okay, let's go ahead and talk about contingent consideration in the context of a merger. And actually, this applies to estimated contingent liabilities, in almost any situation. Let's say that big company is going to acquire little company, is a transaction to be accounted for as a merger. Little company's fair value of net assets is $300,000, and big is going to pay $350,000 in cash. Plus, they're also going to enter into a contingent consideration agreement. Now, when Big and Little negotiate this transaction, of course, Big wants to pay as little as possible, Little wants to receive as much as possible. So they go back and forth and back and forth. And finally, what they might do is say, look, if this really turns out to be a great merger from Big's perspective, then we, Big, will give the previous owners of Little some additional money, some additional compensation, where this additional compensation is contingent upon some future event happening or not happening. At the other extreme, if the merger really doesn't work out very well, and whether it's sales growth or earnings growth or market share or what have you, if the positive results just really aren't there, then Big won't give the previous Little owners any additional funds. And so let's say we go ahead and make up this schedule of possible outcomes and possible payoffs. Let's say that the contingency is based on earnings growth. So it's going to be based on 3-year compound earnings growth. And let's say that if 3-year compound earnings growth is anywhere from 0 to 3%, there won't be any additional payment at all. Say, look, that's just not a very positive outcome. We're not going to give you any more money. If 3-year compound earnings growth is anywhere from 3.01 to 6%, we'll pay an additional $30,000. If 3-year compound earnings growth is anywhere from 6.01% to 9%, we'll pay another $60,000. If it's 9% plus, or 9+%, we'll pay $100,000. And so here's the list of possible outcomes and possible payoffs. Again, there's sort of contingency. The better the merger does, as measured by 3-year compound earnings growth, the greater the additional payment to the previous owners of Little. Now, we want to find what's the expected value of this contract on the date we sign the contract. So we're going to make up some admittedly subjective probability estimates. And basically, I'm just going to be pulling these numbers out of thin air. All that matters is they have to sum to 100%. So let's say we think there's a 20% chance that we're going to fall in that 0 to 3% band, a 30% chance that we're going to fall in that 3 to 6% band, a 35% chance we're going to fall in that 6 to 9% band, and so far we've got 65, 85, a 15% chance we're going to fall in that top tier. So to get the expected value, we simply multiply the payment by the probability. So 0 times 20% is obviously 0. 30% times 30,000 is 9,000. 35% of 6,000 is 21,000. And 15% of 100,000 is 15,000. So the expected value of this contingent consideration is $45,000. Now, clearly, we're not going to pay $45,000. That's guaranteed to be wrong. We're either going to pay 0, 30, 60, or $100,000. This is simply the statistical expected value of that contingent consideration. So let's go ahead and say that Big pays, in addition to paying $350,000 in cash, Big is also going to promised to pay additional consideration with an expected value of $45,000. And for the moment, let's go ahead and leave this as a simple example. We're going to bring in issues of present values and things like that in just a moment. For the moment, let's just ignore the present value issues here. So the total payment, or the total consideration, we got cash of $350. We've got the contingency of $45 for total consideration of $395,000. Now I need to use this board space, but I got to save my little information here. So let's say 0 to 3 is 0, 20%. 3 to 6 is 30. 30%. 6 to 9 is 60. 35%. And then 9 plus is 100,000. 15%. And all I'm doing is saving my information so I can use it later if we need it. Okay, so let's go ahead and record the acquisition. Big is paying a total of $395,000, $350,000 cash, plus $45,000 of contingent consideration for a little company who has net assets of $300,000. So there must be $95,000 of goodwill inherent in this transaction. So they record the net assets, they record the goodwill. And again, what are they surrendering? They're surrendering cash of $350, plus they're putting themselves on the hook for a liability, a contingent liability with an expected value of $45,000. I'm just going to go ahead and call that contingent liability, cont liab. Okay? Let's say this is January 1st, 20. Now, let's say that 3 years later, we come to the end of our 3-year contingency period, and actual sales growth comes in at 5%. That's right, actual earnings growth. So we're going to be falling within this band. And the agreement was, if earnings growth was between 3 and 6%, we were going to give the previous owners of the little company $30,000 in cash. So we're going to go ahead and write a check for, so this is 12/31/22. End of 20, end of 21, end of 22. So 3 years later, we're going to go ahead and write a check for $30,000. By doing so, we're satisfying that $45,000 contingent liability. The $15,000 savings is going to be a gain. Basically, we thought we were going to owe $45,000. Well, in fact, in reality, of course, we knew there was no way we were going to pay $45,000. That was the expected value, $45,000. And we only had to pay $30,000. We saved $15,000. That's going to be a gain. Okay. Now, this topic of contingent consideration is much like the topic of asset retirement obligations, which you've no doubt covered somewhere else in your academic career. And there are two things we need to add to this to make it a little bit better. First is the issue of the time value of money. This is a long-term liability. There's a 3-year time horizon here. This is a long-term liability which should be recorded at its present value. So let's go ahead and assume a nice round 10% discount rate. The second issue is, as we move through time, closer and closer to the end of that 3-year period, we're going to get new information about whether this merger was a great idea, whether it was a bad idea, whether it was a so-so idea. But basically, as we get more information, these subjective probabilities are likely to change. If the merger is really going great guns and we're making all sorts of money and earnings growth is off the charts, we'd say, look, we think there's probably a 100% chance we're going to pay $100,000. In that case, having a contingent liability based on an old lowball estimate of the expected cost really isn't appropriate. So each year we're going to need to do two things. We're going to need to adjust for the accrual of interest, basically the time value of money. And secondly, we're going to have to revise that contingent liability to reflect any new information regarding the expected payout. So let's go ahead and tweak this a little bit. Present value of $45,000, discounted for 3 years at 10%. We need 3 hands here, at least 2 that work properly. So present value, $33,809. So our contingency, instead of being the full $45,000, it's going to be discounted. The present value of that $45,000 to be paid in 3 years, discounted at 10%, is $33,809, which means that our goodwill is $83,809. Now let's go ahead and get a T account going here for our contingent liability. So our contingent liability starts at $33,809. That's January 1st, 20. Now there are 2 things that have to happen at the end of the year. First, we need to accrue interest on that contingent liability. And again, we've got this nice round 10% discount rate. So 10% of $33,809 is $3,381. So we're going to go ahead and record interest expense, $3,381. And that's going to get added to our contingent liability. Now, if we weren't entertaining the notion of changes in the likelihood of payment, if we were simply looking at the present value aspects of this, then after 3 years we would accrue interest. It would grow from $33,809 to $37 and change to $41 and change up to $45. So we would accrue interest. It would grow to $45,000, at which point we would satisfy the liability. In this case, though, let's say that the merger is going better than we initially expected, and now the expected value rises to initially the expected value was $45,000. Let's say it rises to $50,000. And so we say, look, that contingent liability needs to have a balance equal to the present value of the expected payment. Now the expected, we're 1 year into the 3-year cycle, and so now there's 2 years left to go. The present value of $50,000 discounted for 2 years at 10% is $41,322. And so we'd say, look, we had our initial balance of $33,809. We accrued interest on that. $33,881 got us up to $37,190. So to get us from the existing $37,190 up to the desired $41,322, we've got to add another $41,032. That'll bring that contingent liability up to the point where its balance, $41,322, is equal to the present value of the expected total cost. So we're going to go ahead and add $41,032 to our contingent liability. And then the question is, what do we call that increase in our liability? At first, you might be tempted to say, well, gee, this simply means our acquisition is costing us more. The initial acquisition cost of $383,809 was incorrect. We're actually paying more than that. Let's just go ahead and tack that additional 4132 onto our goodwill. That's not going to be the case though. Basically, the acquisition cost of 383,809 or 383,809, that acquisition cost, that is the fair value of what we gave up when we gave it up. When we entered into this contract, we thought that contingent consideration agreement had a present value of 33,809. If there are subsequent changes, either increases or decreases, that doesn't change the fact that when we entered into this acquisition, we gave up stuff that we thought was worth 383,809. So basically, that change in the contingent liability is just simply going to be a loss. It's going to cost. We thought we only owed 37,000. Turns out we owe 41. Oh well, too bad. We have a loss. Okay, let's go ahead and do this one more year. So 12/31. The second year, because that's 21. Again, step one is going to be to accrue interest. Interest at 10%, 4,132. So interest expense, 4,132, and that gets added to our contingent liability. And that brings our total up to 45,454. And then we say, okay, and then notice, please, that's the present value of the $50,000 old expected value, discounted for 1 year at 10%. Now we say, look, there's only 1 year left to run, but this merger is really taking off. Now we think the expected payout, it's not certain that we're going to pay $100,000, but we think it's pretty darn likely. The expected value is up to $80,000. Yeah. And so again, we say, look, that contingent liability account, that needs to have a balance equal to the present value of $80,000 discounted for 1 year at 10%. So $80,000 divided by 1.1 is 72,727. And so basically we need to tack on almost $30,000 of additional contingent liability to get it up to that level. So again, right now we're at 45,454. That's our beginning of year balance plus the interest we accrued. So we're at 45,454. We've got to bump that up to 72,727. So we need to add 27,273. So again, we're going to go ahead and increase our contingent liability again by 27,273, and that's going to be another unfortunate loss for us. Now in this case, I assumed that the value of our contingent liability we're assuming that the expected value of our liability was rising. So we kept having these losses. As it turned out, we were going to pay more and more and more. It's just as likely that the expected value will fall. What if it turned out that this merger was starting to look like a really horrible idea, and we thought that, hey, the expected payout might well be zero. It's going to be one of these really low values. In that case, instead of increasing the contingent liability at this step for this one and this one, instead of increasing the contingent liability, we might be decreasing the contingent liability and recording a gain. Again, as I said earlier, this in conceptual steps is just like accounting for an asset retirement obligation. Again, here in Harrisburg, we're just across the river from 3 Mile Island, the nuclear power plant, which they're talking about shutting down. Now, when they shut down the 3 Mile Island nuclear plant, they don't just lock the gates and walk away, right? They're going to have to mothball it, encase everything in concrete. You're going to have 24/7 security for God knows how many years. And so there's this huge cost associated with retiring that asset. And every year, the expected value changes. The cost of disposing of hazardous waste changes. The charge of security changes. The expectations for how long they're going to have to control it change. There are all these changes in the assumptions underlying the asset retirement obligation. So, the mechanics and the sort of the basic underlying principles are exactly the same as what we have here. This is a contingent liability whose future value is unknown. We're always estimating what do we think the expected value of the liability is, and what's the present value of that liability. Okay, thanks. Hope that helps.